Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce, the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is Tim Wallace Murphy. And we're going to be talking about the importance of symbolism in ancient medieval art. And this is a subject that Tim's done a lot of research in, and he's had a book out called Cracking the Symbol Code. And, well, I've had him on my show a couple other times that talk about Jesus and the descendants of Jesus and other things as well, but I think it's the first time I've had a chance to actually have him come on here and talk to us about the importance of symbolism inside of medieval art, which I've only, heard a little bit, read a little bit about it. So today ought to be a real learning experience for me. So Tim, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. It's nice to be on the show again. And good evening, as it is here, to all your listeners. I think it's probably midday where you are.
Yeah, it's about 1 o'clock. I just had lunch a few minutes ago. But listen, Tim, it's always a pleasure to have you here. You're a fantastic guest, and you're a very knowledgeable man. And I know you're really interested in the Sufi religion of the was it Muslim Sufi religion?
It's not Sufism is not a religion.
Okay.
It's a spiritual path. In fact, it is many spiritual paths.
Okay, well, I'm glad you got that cleared up for me.
Sufi traditions that there are Protestant sects, so it can get quite confusing. But the particular tradition that I study most is the Medevil, which are known in the West as the whirling dervishes. And the other name for their spiritual path is the path of love, compassion, and service.
So you more or less do it with the path that most mirrored what was important to you.
Yeah, very much so. All spiritual paths of whatever origin, doesn't matter what culture they come from, require the attainment of the same qualities: humility, service, and love of God. And they all lead to exactly the same place.
Right.
And when you practice one for any reasonable length of time, you stop believing in God because you know that God is there. And knowledge is certainty. It's an absolute. And the name of the game then is to subdue your ego and serve other people.
Okay. Well, we're fixing to get to the cracking the symbol code, but you just said something I wanted to enhance on real quick before we do. And that's when you made mention of the fact about you stopped believing in God because you now know that He's there. I found that an interesting point for you to make because I was brought up under Pentecostal, Baptist, Catholicism, and all other sorts of religions. And the one thing that was recurring in all of them is they always want to know, do you believe in God? Not whether or not you know God. So I thought that was a very interesting point you just made.
Well, there's a difference between spirituality and religion. And a colleague of mine asked a Jesuit priest a long time ago, what is the difference? And the priest responded with the following answer. He said, well, son, to explain that, I've got to tell you a little story. Spirituality is symbolized by a fresh spring water that arises naturally at the top of the mountain. And that water represents God's love for all of creation. And under God's wonderful gift of gravity, it trickles down the mountainside and sustains and strengthens and refreshes everything that it touches. Now, religion is something else again. That's the well-intentioned man-made plumbing, which usually makes the water go uphill where it shouldn't go, and will often as not whistle it past your ass without the benefit of a tap. Being man-made, it always pollutes the water. So if you've any doubts, my son, go back to the spring. And that's what people have been doing since the very beginning of time. And our very earliest symbolism, spiritual symbolism, are among the earliest archaeological artifacts known to mankind. They're the cave paintings at places like Lascaux, Altamira, or in the Ariège in France, one of which displays a man in shamanistic costume. Now, shamanism is the forerunner of religion. Colin Wilson described that in every culture, every tribe, there are a small group of people, maybe 3%, which he called the few. And these are the people who knew they had spiritual gifts and sought means to improve and enhance them. And these became the shamans of religion, shamans of tribal culture, when we were hunter-gatherers, and later on became the hereditary priests of emerging religions. And of course, shamanism is alive and well today, in Africa, in Asia, and of course, in North America. What most North American people fail to realize is they're sitting cheek by jowl with one of the richest series of spiritual traditions known to mankind. And it's a pity more of them don't study it amongst the Native American people.
Yeah, that's true. I wanted to, though, go into more detail with you about your book you wrote here a while back. I never have got a chance to read it yet, but it is a very interesting sounding book. Because I've read a little bit online about symbolism in ancient art, and your book about cracking the code in it. Can you tell us a little something about what this book is about and what it covers?
It traces the history of spiritual symbolism from mankind's earliest origins right up to today. And it needs to be told here that the great 20th century mystic Rudolf Steiner claimed that symbolism can be interpreted in any one of up to 9 different levels, depending on the development of the person who's viewing it. Now, I can try and explain symbolism until I'm blue in the face, and that will help people to look a little deeper. But symbolism is not there to be explained. It's there to be experienced. And the trick is, with modern technology, from the comfort of your own home, you can flash out pictures of symbolism from every spiritual culture in the world and every religious culture in the world. And the trick is to just put them on your screen and sit in front of them meditatively and see what happens, see what they do for you, because they communicate at a level that is beyond speech and beyond explanation.
Well, yeah, I know that I've read and heard tell that you can actually retain more or get more from symbolism than you can actual speech.
Oh, yes, much more, infinitely more. And we have the symbolism of the ages at our fingertips if we need it. I mean, starting off with the shamans, early man founded Neolithic temples. Nobody's sure what rituals they held there or what they did there and why. But early on, they started to get spiritual answers to the problems that beset them. They were trying to survive in a very hostile world. And the first thing they learned was how to domesticate plants and animals. That led to the rise of civilization and cities. And with that came the development of religion. And each religion has its own teaching and its own mythology, which is expressed in symbolism. And probably the classic case of that was ancient Egypt, which of course is ultimately the birthplace of the great religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And Egyptian symbolism is a vast field. The Egyptians had a very different worldview to us, which they gained through spiritual insight from following their path. And the priests and pharaohs who were the main movers in this, yes, they had the privileges of rank and money and power, but the secrets they learned from their spiritual search were for the benefit of the entire country. And they achieved levels of brain surgery, for example, that we are only just beginning to replicate. They did wonders in architecture. They developed an understanding of astrology or astronomy, which is very closely akin to our own. So the spiritual path can be an immensely productive and rewarding process. But it's all to do with service. And serving the needs of other people is what it's all about.
But at some point, there was some kind of a branch off between spiritualism and materialism, wasn't there? And one became religion and one remained spiritualism, in other words?
Don't use the term spiritualism.
Okay.
Use spirituality. There's a very big difference. Spiritualism is a modern phenomenon. It's only about 150 years old, and it's all about contacting the souls of the dead. And that idea, frankly, leaves me cold. Spirituality is a way of deepening your conscious contact with God, whichever name you care to call him, and learning to submit yourself to the divine will.
Okay, I was always under the impression they were the same thing, so I didn't know.
No, very, very different. Very different.
But at any rate, there was a split off between the two, and one went on to become more of a religious, while the other one followed more of the spirituality. If I understood what I've read in the past, is that correct?
That has become the case, but it was not always so. There was a very great teacher about 800 years ago, a wonderful man known as the Mevlana, otherwise known as Jalaluddin Rumi. And he said there is a pathway which is the foundation for all the great faiths, which pervades each one of them and rises above them all. And that is the pathway of love. And it's important to remember that. Because when you say, I'm a Catholic, or a Buddhist, or a Baptist, or a Mormon, or a Muslim, you're actually making a statement which separates you from the rest of mankind, the vast majority of mankind. But when you follow the spiritual pathway that is or should be at the heart of your religion, you're uniting yourself with the entire world. Because that pathway only leads to 2 or 3 objectives. Recognizing the universal brotherhood of all mankind under the fatherhood of God, love and compassion, and service to the needs of those less fortunate than yourself.
Which you don't see a lot of that going on in the world today. And then what you do see going on in a lot of cases is just for show.
It's just for show, or worse yet, religious differences can be exploited by people for political reasons and used to divide instead of unite.
Which we've seen a lot of that happening through the early medieval ages, which brings us back to your book. Didn't it become necessary at some point for followers of spirituality to actually embed this message into the art in order to keep it alive?
Yes, because the original Christian church, the Catholic Church, was more of a vehicle of political control than it was a carrier of spirituality. The spirituality is still there if you dig deep enough, but it was all about control. For example, when Jesus was walking this earth, the high priest in Jerusalem was his people's representative before God, praying for forgiveness for his people. Once Christianity became established as the dominant faith in Europe, the Pope became God's representative towards the people and tried to impose his will on everybody. Peasant and pauper, noble, king, emperor, they all had to submit to the Pope. And the church did not allow any discussion or any practice of any other religion other than their own. If you disagreed with them, you were invited along to the next church barbecue, only you were on the menu. So you learned to keep your mouth shut. Now, the only people with any wealth who could fund artwork were, of course, the church. So the people of the hidden streams of spirituality learned to encode their messages in church art. And it's still there for us to this day.
Now, I noticed that one of the things that they've been said that they embedded into church art that I've read about on the internet, and I've seen pictures of, was pictures of Mary Magdalene with Jesus with her belly being pregnant that was supposed to signify that she was with child and married to Jesus, but it was put in like a big stained glass window in one of the churches. I forget which one. Was that one of the things they were trying to, convey along the lines for future generations?
Oh, yes. They were conveying several messages. First of all, the hidden streams of spirituality who claimed descent from the 24 high priests of Jerusalem, which included Jesus' family, they were pushing the message that Jesus did not come to redeem us from sin. That was an idea which was blasphemous to the Jews. He came to reveal a pathway of spirituality. He came to reveal, not to redeem. Secondly, he was a human being like everybody else, a particularly gifted one, probably the most supremely gifted spiritual teacher that's ever walked this earth. And it was the pathway that was important because we could follow it, if only we knew how. And the triggers as to how to find this pathway is encoded in church art, under the very noses of the people who were trying to suppress it.
Only they didn't know what they were looking at. They didn't decipher it.
Right. They couldn't decipher it. They were not party to it. And this is why knowledge of the fact that Jesus had a family and has descendants has been current in Europe for over about 2,000 years. Outside Catholic Europe, it was virtually unknown. Most of the English-speaking Protestant sects had no idea about this. And it was also, the symbolism was used to refute some of the more ridiculous doctrines in Christianity, such as the Holy Trinity. There is but one God. And it doesn't matter what name you call it. What matters is that you seek God and strive to obey Him.
Now, the way I understood it was the Trinity of God was something that was really devised by the Council in Nicaea some 300 years after 360 years, I think it was, or so, after the death of Jesus, and that it was really about turning Jesus into a God-man when he was really never was a God-man.
Yeah, he never claimed to be. Even in the New Testament, which is not the most reliable document we've ever seen, as a source of spiritual inspiration, it is marvelous, but as a piece of history, it's a load of crap. It was written by people who were not Jews, who didn't fully realize what it meant for Jesus as a Jew to be teaching other Jews, or what he was trying to achieve, and they had no knowledge of Jewish practice and beliefs. So some crazy ideas came in. Now, you know Jewish kosher law. Animals must be killed in such a manner the blood is drained from them.
Right.
Right, okay. You can't touch blood. Now, if Jesus had turned around and said, drink this, this is my blood, he'd have been stoned to death for blasphemy. Nowhere in the New Testament, flawed and all as it is, does Jesus claim to be either God or the Son of God. The only title he lays claim to is Son of Man, which has a particular spiritual meaning.
Yeah, I've heard something about to the people back in the days of Jesus, and actually further back than that, like during the days of Elijah and Elisha, it had a particular meaning, and that it not only applied to Jesus, but it also applied to Elijah and Elisha, I think it was, as well, but it designated a spiritual path or something, didn't it?
Yeah, it did indeed, and it's a very ancient one which traces its original roots back to Egypt. Came through Egypt into Judaism as it developed, and crept into Christianity, albeit below the surface in a hidden manner, and it's still very much alive today.
Now, is it not the one that's still very much alive in the path that you're following and other paths like it?
Oh, yes, it is. And here's another thing. There are many spiritual paths, and people get confused, and they often ask me which one should they follow. To which the short answer is, how the hell do I know? I don't know the person. I don't know their weaknesses or their strengths. And who am I to choose for them? Because seeking a spiritual path and making a decision to follow it is part of the spiritually transformative process. Now, there was a lady friend of mine who's, thank God, still alive. Wonderful lady. She was an American called Eleanor Viva. She now lives in Spain. And when she was younger, she did a PhD thesis in anthropology. Now, at that time, she was an agnostic. She didn't know whether to believe in God or not, much less which religion to follow. And she chose a rather odd subject for an agnostic. She did her thesis on behavioral change brought about by pilgrimage. And she walked the Camino Santiago, the pilgrimage trail across from France to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, several times, interviewing pilgrims as she went. And this became the basis of her thesis. And in her thesis, she recounts that she met an elderly gentleman at the Cathedral of Leon and said, "Are you on the Camino Santiago?" And he replied, "No, madam, I'm on a much older train. It's the Camino des Estrellas, the pilgrimage of the stars. The ancients were using this for centuries before the Christians came along and ruined it." And she had a moment of insight. She realized that beneath every valid spiritual path, there is truly only the one. And it was many years later, when she became a Sufi, that the truly profound nature of what she'd written became apparent to her. Because in the Islamic tradition, the one is the indivisible, Almighty God himself. So it matters little to me if somebody follows the Kabbalah, which is from the Jewish tradition, one of the Sufi paths from Islam, or any of the Christian mystical paths, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, or the traditions from the Hindu religion, because they're all going to lead to the same place. They're all going to require the development of the same abilities. You choose the one that is the most comfortable for you, and you follow it with patience and persistence, and you will gain sacred knowledge and insight which cannot be given to you by another human being.
Now, this was the very thing for me when I read my Bible that stuck out. And I know the Bible's not a perfect document. I'm not saying it is, but I do believe it has some good information in it. And one of the things that Jesus was asking at one point was he asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter was the one that figured out, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, I'm not saying God was a God-man when I say this, but I am saying that there was an embedded message in this here particular passage, at least to me there was, wherein he congratulated Peter for realizing this. But what I'm talking about was Jesus was at that time, I think, talking about building his church on a spiritual basis of people who were in contact with God through their, own spirit, rather than the established church, in other words.
I'm now going to upset all your Christian listeners. Jesus would never have said anything of the sort.
Oh, really?
Yes. Don't forget, the New Testament was written not merely between 40 and 100 years after his death. It was written after Jerusalem had been destroyed by the Romans, and the people who walked and talked with Jesus and knew what he was and who he was were scattered or dead. It was written by people who were not Jewish. The term church, for example, would not have occurred to them. It didn't exist in their language. Secondly, he would never have claimed or congratulated anybody in calling him the Son of God. And Peter, as a devout Jew, would not have used that term. The New Testament, like the rest of the Bible, was written for political reasons at different times, for people whose viewpoint had changed very dramatically from the time of Jesus, and they had their own axe to grind. They were mainly followers of a man called St. Paul, who was a Roman agent, a relative of King Herod, and to check that out, just read his own epistles, and it was written for political reasons. Paul was the first one to put forward the idea that Jesus was God. He refers to him as his Savior. None of Jesus' followers would have believed this.
Well, that's very interesting, Tim.
Jesus' followers existed for a long time after that, for about 150 years after Jesus, and they were known as the Ebionim. And they were castigated by a leading church bishop, Irenaeus of Lyon, in the 3rd century, because these people did not believe Jesus was God and did not subscribe to church doctrine. And in fact, Irenaeus made a rather contradictory statement. Now remember, Irenaeus was a Catholic bishop. He believed Jesus was God and all the rest of it. And yet he said, it's a pity that when Jesus was on earth, he led the wrong flock. Now think about it. As far as Irenaeus is concerned, Jesus was God and incapable of making mistakes. So how could he have led the wrong flock? Let's get real. Jesus' teaching was embedded to a large extent in early Christian doctrine, but with a lot of overlay that originated in other religions and other cultures. To the Romans, the idea that a human being could be God was nothing strange. Most of their Caesars were spoken of as gods. Most of the Christian feasts that are celebrated today were stolen from other religions. The idea that Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead was a direct pinch from the Mithraic cult of Sol Invictus. All of these things are not original. What is original is the central core, which Jesus was asked, what do I do to be saved? And we know the report on his answer is true because it's a direct quote from Jewish scripture of 600 years before his time. He said, honor the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy might, and love thy neighbor as thyself. Therein hangeth the law and the prophets. Pure biblical Judaism. And that's just as important today as it was then. And let's face it, anybody who tries to live up to that, irrespective of whatever religion they might claim to follow, they're doing their level best to follow God's will.
Well, that's what I'm glad about talking to you every so often here on my show, because you got so much knowledge that I don't have. And like I said a few minutes ago, I knew the Bible wasn't exactly a perfect creation there, and I had doubts about the story of the Virgin Mary, for example, just to list one. But I had always thought that that was an accurate passage until now. So you've definitely given me something for food for thought. And I, really it's a pleasure to have you here to do that.
The name of the game, I'm not here to educate. I'm not here to inform. I'm certainly not here to convert people from one humanly flawed belief system to another. My job is to act as a spiritual provocateur, to make people think about things they've taken for granted and say, is this accurate? Can I learn from it? And actually, can I learn from it is sometimes far more important than its historical accuracy. Because anything that teaches people to behave in a better manner towards their fellow man and towards the planet we live on is divinely inspired.
Well, I could be wrong, but I personally think anything that provokes a man into thinking about something has the same end result.
Not necessarily. The results you can't predict. The results you can't predict. Many people listen to me or read my books and they go off and do their own research and they come to totally different conclusions. And that's fine. God gave us free will. And the important thing is that we're prepared to search and question. and ultimately submit to God's will.